This episode is brought to you by the Sodality Kickstarter.
All right, it's time to get into another one of these, is it? Yeah, that episode took a while to come out. I'm sorry about that, guys. I admit that was probably one of my weaker episodes, but the next episode should come a whole lot faster. I mean, the script is already done, and I normally like to do afterthoughts on my videos, but this time it's actually going to be sort of a preview for what's happening. You can kind of see the ominous product placement going on here, although this one only gets like a little bit of coverage, but I figured I should talk about, you know, the sort of competition in card games, particularly not competition, but imitation is more like it, because one thing I find is there are a lot of games that basically imitate the big three that I have here. I have a saying, imitation may be the greatest form of flattery, but it is the weakest form of competition, and that applies tremendously with trading card games. I have the cards from over 100 card games. I revealed that in my Redemption video, which is the card game about the Bible, which I gave a full review to. I kind of had to. I mean, I was like, whoa, this game still exists, the toy fair. And the guy was like, here's a bunch of cards. And I was like, But anyway, the big three, you will notice, actually barely have anything in common at all. These three games are remarkably different. The only thing that Yu-Gi-Oh! Magic and Pokemon have in common is that you fight against other players using monster cards, and they can't even agree on the circumstances for that, because with Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic, you're attacking with your monsters to reduce your opponent's life points, but in Pokemon, defeating the monsters themselves is the goal. So they can't even agree on the circumstances of monsters fighting. They don't all use the same card size, they don't all use resource cards. Like I said, they don't really share much of anything. I mean, if you really wanted to stretch, you could say, oh, there's certain things in each game you can only do once per turn. Well, you know, you could say that about every game. You know what you typically do once per turn in every game? Draw a card from the top of your deck. But yeah, Pokemon doesn't have anything like an interrupt effect. You don't have any cards that you can play on your opponent's turn in Pokemon. Let's see. I'm trying to think of some other ones. I had a bunch, but I honestly, it's harder to come up with similarities between these three games than it is to come up with differences. All three of these games feel very distinct. Oh, I know. One thing that all of these games have in mind is that it is possible for your entire turn to go through half of your deck and take 10 minutes. That is something I will admit that these games have in common, although that allows me to segue into my next point. You're not going to beat Magic the Gathering by trying to be Magic the Gathering, okay? I'm kind of sick and tired of seeing games that are sword and sorcery with a resource row and 5 colors. I mean, Argent Saga, Dragoborn, Force of Will, all of those, they're basically Magic the Gathering, but not as good. Here's the danger of, I admit at one point I said that maybe it's not a bad idea to copy certain elements from other card games that you've seen in order to help people who are familiar with it. Do so with trepidation, because one thing I have come to realize is that if your game feels too much like Magic the Gathering, all that's really going to do is remind your players how much fun Magic the Gathering is. And since everybody's still playing Magic the Gathering, they're going to go back to playing Magic the Gathering. I don't think I've really seen any competition for like Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh, but the Magic the Gathering clones, and in Japan, the Duel Masters clones are all over the place. But here's the thing, is a lot of the games I've found that suffer from the 2-year curse, where they get like a spike in interest at the very beginning, but then, you know, kind of give out. Here's the thing, is what a lot of them tend to do is they tend to address a grievance. For example, Imagination was a game that addressed the concept of resource cards. People were unhappy that you had to spend so much of your deck in Magic and Pokemon drawing resource cards. This game came out before Yu-Gi-Oh! Was introduced in the United States, and so for Imagination, they made it, hey, your life points are your resources. There's no resource cards in your whole deck. And that was, you know, a grievance that they addressed, and it got the game a lot of attention. They had trouble capitalizing on it, partly because they had a ton of regions, which, thanks to a soft rule, as I mentioned in the video, they couldn't really mix together. Then they introduced a clan whose whole thing was they're super powerful, but they can't be mixed together. So nobody was mixing decks anyway, so that turned out to be a really strong deck with 0 downsides. That was not good for it at all. Another one was Lightseekers. Lightseekers, I know I've talked about it. It is a remarkably different game, but a grievance it addressed was the one I mentioned before about turns that take forever. By limiting each player to 2 actions per turn, possibly even 1 if they play a combo card, it means that turns are a lot swifter. You also have the cards that automatically track themselves, so you're not really going to be doing much more than 2 things on average on your turn. You might do like 3 or 4 things on your turn if you have some buffs in play. You might be reduced to just 1 if you're using a combo, but it was designed more for EDH, Elder Dragon Highlander, which is Magic the Gathering, but with more than 2 players. It was designed with having more than 2 players in mind, by having the speed up. I don't know if Lightseekers has been doing great recently. It got some attention when it launched, but it was also bogged down by the whole Toys to Life thing it was trying to do. But you're not necessarily going to get a lot of places by imitating games. Bakugan, I think, too, it's definitely guilty of 5 colors and resource row, if I count Aurelus as being... Well, Aurelus is, as by design, a set that does not get a lot of cards. It's the Bakugan equivalent of gray. But I think Bakugan was maybe also an attempt to... deal with the turn problem by having turns taking place simultaneously with the ability to cast all cards at instant speed. That depends. I've played against a couple of decks that have a ton of shenanigans they do on their turn, so we'll just have to see how well that holds up. Although we have the Dragon Ball card game, which is the Dragon Ball Super card game, is a bit of an interesting question, because this is a game that plays a lot like Duel Masters. It has the same kind of shield system, it has the resource row at the bottom, but I think the big ticket to Dragon Ball Super card game success, along with, aside from the fact that it's Dragon Ball, I think that Dragon Ball has a lot to do with it, because a card game about Dragon Ball is going to draw a different sort of audience than, like, Magic the Gathering, or even Pokemon, or maybe even Yu-Gi-Oh! It draws a different audience, and I think that helps. Not to mention, there is a pretty significant distance from games like Duel Masters or Wii Cross. We haven't really had a shield system game, or in this case, it's 8 points of life. We haven't really had a shield system game in this country since Kaijudo, and not a lot of people really paid attention to Kaijudo because they were like, oh, it's just Magic Light. So I think the fact that Dragon Ball Super... has not only that distance from games like Duel Masters, but the fact that it generally draws a different audience, I think that is one of the big keys to its success. Oh. And then there's this thing. This is kind of the elephant in the room after that episode. Yeah. I tried to keep my own personal hatred out of it. I have said that, I mentioned my own personal game store, which that really did happen. I have the receipts. I don't have the card with me, but I have his business card. I have Takaaki Kidani's business card, so I have the receipts to prove that he showed up at this store. But there is no store in my entire state that sells Vanguard, and I know I visited all of them. So it's at least not around my neck of the woods. My big problem with the series is, I have a small issue with the unmixable attributes. I kind of illustrated the logistical problems that causes. My problem with Vanguard has always been its branding, though. The show rubs me very much the wrong way, and it's because of this guy. It's Gordon. It was an episode, oh, did you get that in the new expansion set? Did you get it because of the help of your friends? Did you get it because you understood the meta? No, it's because I spent money on cards this morning. Yeah. That's enough about that. But I guess Vanguard did address a grievance. It is a very different kind of game. It has only units as playable. You can play as many of them as you want on your turn. The only real once per turn restriction is leveling up. And it also has a way to, take the damage you might take and turn it into something you can use. So I guess as far as addressing grievances are concerned, it doesn't require any like fancy tokens or life calculation to play. Although I guess a lot of games have tried to do that. They've tried to build like truly immaculate card games where all you need are the cards. You don't need anything to, you know, detect life counters or anything. No life counters, no damage counters or anything. Here's the thing. Every household has dice. You can buy dice at a grocery store. Actually, you know, I don't even know if I should get into that because I have a whole video that's going to be dedicated to that. That's going to be episode 6, and you are going to see a lot about episode 6. I might even follow up episode 6 with my personal thoughts on Redakai now that I have had a few years to think about it and properly, you know, articulate my thoughts that aren't just based on rage and hatred because of how they tried to use it to replace Bakugan. Honestly, being mad at it because they tried to replace Bakugan with it was kind of unfair on my point, because there's plenty to hate about Redakai aside from that. But, yeah, imitation in the world of trading card games is, you know, not a great idea. You really need, not only do you need to, you know, address a grievance. If your game addresses a grievance, that's great, but afterwards you need to build on that. You cannot just be a breath of fresh air. And, you know, you hear games described as a breath of fresh air when they address a grievance with one of these major games, but you can't settle for that. You don't just want to be one breath. You want to really give your players some cardio. So after they take that breath of fresh air, you throw a few curveballs at them to, you know, go like, oh, hey, this game has more going on than just addressing the problems I have with Magic the Gathering. You have to, you know, you have to keep up and stay punchy, and that's how you avoid the 2-year curse. So, this was a pretty brief one. I guess that's it for this talk. So, see you in the next episode. Like I said, the script's done, so it should come out way faster than this one. So what is Sodality? Is it Pepsi Man's Mortal Kombat finishing move?
Sodality.
Wrong! Are you sick and tired of card games about sword and sorcery? Want a card game that features cyber armor and hover tanks? You like Destiny? You like Mass Effect? You want that in a card game? That's Sodality for you!
Sodality.
Are you tired of waiting for your opponent to finish creating cow tokens? Wait no more! Tear into your opponent with the speed of a cyber ninja! This is what your turn looks like!
Sodality.
Yo, Shadrach!
What is it? Do you need me to destroy your enemies?
Actually, could you spot me a couple of bucks, man? Requisition system!
Sodality.
Sodality! Check out the link to the Kickstarter in the doobly-doo below.
Sodality.